Good evening, and welcome to News of the World. It's Saturday, August 15th. Tonight, we drift slowly across 28 countries, from Colombia to Iraq. There's nothing you need to do, and nowhere you need to be. Settle in, and let the world turn. Colombia has been living through a week of rupture. A powerful 7.4 magnitude earthquake shook the country, and the toll has been heavy. 285 lives lost, with others still missing beneath collapsed buildings. The headlines call it devastation, and they are right too. But amid the grief, something else has surfaced. Signs of life. People trapped under debris, still breathing, still waiting. Rescuers have been racing to reach them, working through unstable rubble with whatever tools they have, listening for any sound that means someone is still there. Help has come from beyond Colombia's borders. A technical support team from Los Angeles County deployed. Texans have been organizing aid. The International Federation of Red Cross Societies has mobilized, and Colombia's own people, neighbors, volunteers, first responders have been at it since the ground first moved. The earthquake has also landed hard on remote regions, places that were already far from the center of the country's attention and resources. Colombia's leader has been pushing to bring more power and support to those areas, and this disaster has only sharpened that urgency. It is a strange and difficult thing, the way catastrophe lays bare what was already fragile. If you're still with me, hold a thought tonight for the people still waiting under that rubble, and for the hands working to pull them free. Sometimes the loudest story is the one you expect, but the one worth carrying into the night is quieter. It is the sound of someone, somewhere, still breathing, still here. Peru has been feeling the pressure of rising fuel costs, and the people who feel it most directly are the ones behind the wheel. Bus drivers, truckers, the small operators who keep goods and passengers moving across a country that stretches from the Pacific coast high into the Andes and deep into the Amazon basin. When costs climb, fares follow, and fares are something every household understands. Protests had been building in the transport sector, a familiar kind of tension in a place where the road is both livelihood and lifeline. The government has now announced fuel subsidies aimed specifically at easing that burden. A measured response, not a sweeping overhaul, but a signal that they heard the frustration before it hardened into something harder to manage. Subsidies like these are a delicate instrument. They cost the public purse, and they don't erase the underlying forces driving prices up, but they buy time, and in a country where a single route can climb thousands of meters from sea level to mountain pass, time on the road matters. If you're still with me, picture those long highways at dusk, minibuses lined up at terminals in Lima, trucks crawling through fog in the highlands, drivers counting what's left after a day's work. What the subsidy quietly says is that the distance between protest and relief doesn't have to be so far. And for now, at least, the roads stay open, and the conversation continues. In Honduras, the lights have been a complicated thing for a long while now. The national power company, known as INE, carries the weight of keeping a whole country connected, but it has struggled under debt and aging infrastructure for years. Blackouts and rationing have become part of ordinary life, something people plan around the way they plan around rain. So there is a quiet significance in the news that Colombian firms are stepping in to support an overhaul of the state power company. The details are still taking shape, but the idea is straightforward enough. Colombia has walked this road before, having restructured its own energy sector, and now some of that experience will travel south. For Honduras, this is not just about machinery or balance sheets. Reliable electricity means children doing homework after dark, clinics keeping vaccines cold, small businesses staying open through the evening. It means a country that can count on something it has not always been able to count on. The work will be slow, as these things always are. There will be contracts and timelines and probably setbacks along the way. But if you're still with me, Consider what it means for a nation to invite help from a neighbor, not out of weakness, but out of a shared understanding that some problems are too heavy to carry alone. Honduras has known darkness, literal and otherwise. Tonight, there is at least the beginnings of a plan to bring a steadier light. Türkiye has been taking stock of a political era that, depending on where you sit, has either remade the country or revealed how much work remains. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan marked 25 years of the AK party this week, telling supporters that, despite everything, they are, in his words, just getting started. A quarter century is a long time for any party to hold the center of a nation's life, and in Türkiye it has meant deep changes. A defense industry that once relied almost entirely on foreign suppliers now builds its own drones and ships. A tech market valued at $58 billion drawing global attention, and an economy that has weathered storms that would have broken lesser structures. Erdogan also spoke about resolving what he called a decades-long terrorism problem through national unity, and there were signs of movement on that front. Sipan Hamo, once prominently listed on Turkey's terror wanted list, has been removed from it. These are the kinds of quiet administrative shifts that sometimes carry more weight than the speeches. Meanwhile, the United Nations has raised concerns about changes to Turkey's juvenile justice system, warning that children could face life sentences under the new reforms. That tension between a government that sees itself as securing the future and outside voices urging caution is not new to Turkey, and it will not resolve quickly. But on this particular evening, the story is the milestone itself. 25 years. A party that began with a promise of change now asks whether the change is still coming or whether it has only just begun. Either way, Türkiye keeps moving and the night settles gently over Anatolia as it always has. Canada finds itself in a familiar kind of waiting these days, the sort that comes when two countries sit across a table and the distance between them doesn't seem to be closing. Sources familiar with the trade talks between Canada and the United States say the two sides are, in their words, not even close to a deal. That phrase carries a particular weight when you remember how much of Canada's economy lives alongside its southern neighbor: factories, supply chains, farms, all threaded together across a border that millions cross without thinking twice. Trade negotiations between these two countries are never just about tariffs or quotas. They're about trust, about the everyday rhythm of commerce that keeps towns on both sides of the line steady and employed. When the people closest to the talks say progress is slow, it doesn't mean something has broken. It means the hard work is still ahead, the kind of patient, unglamorous bargaining that happens in quiet rooms far from cameras. For Canadians watching from Winnipeg or Halifax or the suburbs of Toronto, the stakes are real but abstract, a current moving beneath the surface of ordinary life. The groceries still get stocked, the factories still hum. But underneath, there's an awareness that the terms of the relationship are being renegotiated, and no one can quite say when that will settle. If you're still with me, just hold that thought. A country waiting on a conversation that hasn't found its rhythm yet. It's not a crisis. It's a long, slow exhale. Palestine maintains a diplomatic presence in Baghdad, and this week that presence was formally acknowledged when Iraq's foreign minister received the ambassador of the State of Palestine to the Republic of Iraq. The meeting, announced by the Iraqi Ministry of Foreign Affairs, reflects a relationship that stretches back through decades, one rooted in shared regional history and a sense of solidarity that has survived wars, sanctions, and political upheaval on both sides. Details of their discussion weren't made public, but the gesture itself carries weight. For Palestine, maintaining ambassadorial posts across the Arab world is a quiet assertion of statehood, a way of keeping channels open, keeping representation visible, even when the political horizon at home feels uncertain. And Iraq, for its part, has long positioned itself as a supporter of the Palestinian cause. a stance that crosses sectarian and factional lines in ways few issues in the region do. So a meeting like this, brief as it may have been, is less about breaking news and more about continuity. It's a reminder that diplomacy often works in small, steady rhythms, a handshake, a conversation, a reaffirmation that the door remains open. If you're still with me, you might sit with that image for a moment. Two figures in a room in Baghdad, tending a relationship that neither side takes for granted. It's not loud, it doesn't need to be. Some threads hold precisely because someone keeps holding them. Indonesia sits along the restless belt of the Pacific Ring of Fire, and this week the Earth reminded everyone there just how restless it can be. A powerful earthquake measured at magnitude 7.7 by seismologists struck off the coast in the Flores region, according to early reports. The shaking was significant enough that Indonesian authorities issued a tsunami warning, urging communities along nearby coastlines to move to higher ground. For a country that has lived through this kind of night before, the response is something woven deep into ordinary life. People in coastal towns know the protocols. They know the sound of the sirens, the routes inland, the weight of what it means when the ocean pulls back. The monitoring agencies, the U.S. Geological Survey, the European Mediterranean Seismological Center, all registered the event within minutes of one another, and the figures they reported were close enough to tell you the scale was real. What we don't have yet, as these reports come in, is a full picture of damage or casualties. That information will come slowly, the way it always does in the hours after a quake, phone lines down, roads checked, villages reached one by one. If you're still with me, hold a thought for the people in the Flores region tonight. For the families waiting on high ground, listening for the all clear. For the ones who picked up their children and ran. The sea is quiet for now, but the waiting is its own kind of trembling. And Indonesia, as it has before, will sit with that weight until morning gives back what it can. Romania has watched the Danube shrink this season to a level no one alive has seen before, and the great river's quiet retreat has reached into the country's power supply. The Cernavodă nuclear plant sits on the Danube's banks and depends on its water for cooling. With the river at a record low, the operator Nuclearelectrica began shutting down the plant's sole working reactor. It wasn't a sudden crisis, but a slow reckoning. The water simply wasn't deep enough or cold enough to do the job it has always done. Cernavodă is not alone in this. Across Europe, the summer's heat has pressed hard on rivers that nuclear stations rely on, from the Pax plant in Hungary to Gravelines in France. Warm water and shallow channels make cooling difficult, and the plants must step back. For Romania, losing the reactor means losing a steady chunk of electricity at a time when the heat itself is driving demand. But there is no alarm in how the shutdown is being handled. It is deliberate, measured, the kind of decision made when a river tells you it cannot give what it normally gives. And the Danube, for all its lowing, is still there. Broad and slow, moving past the plant, past towns and farmland, carrying less than it used to, but still carrying what it can. If you're still with me, we'll let the river rest there for now and move on. The Republic of the Congo shares its name and its great river with a neighbor whose story is often harder to tell. Across that water, in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, more than 80,000 people have received food and seed from the International Committee of the Red Cross. The details are spare, we know the number, and we know what was given, but sometimes that's enough to understand what matters. The Democratic Republic of the Congo has been carrying a heavy burden. Ebola has been spreading there, and the UN has warned that the disease is outpacing the response. One life lost roughly every half hour, they said. Community trust, the Red Cross has noted, remains the fragile thread everything hangs on. In that atmosphere, the simple delivery of food and seed to 80,000 people is not just logistics. It's a statement that the future still has a claim on the present. Seed especially carries its own quiet logic. You don't plant unless you believe you'll be there to harvest. You don't harvest unless you believe someone will be there to eat. The two Congos watch each other across that wide river, the way they always have. And tonight, somewhere on the far bank, ground is being prepared and someone, somewhere is planning to stay. San Marino, the tiny republic folded into the hills of northern Italy, is once again choosing its voice for the wider European stage. The San Marino Song Contest for 2026 has named Dulcinea among its contenders, performing a song called My Love. If you know Italian popular music, you may know the name already. Dulcinea is a singer and pianist who has been performing for 2 decades now. Someone whose work tends toward the heartfelt and the direct, songs that sit somewhere between pop and something more stripped back and personal. My Love, from its title alone, suggests she is not straying far from that ground. For San Marino, this contest is a curious and lovely thing. The country has fewer than 34,000 people, one of the smallest populations of any nation in the world, and yet each year it goes looking for a song to send out to hundreds of millions of listeners across the continent. There is something quietly stubborn and rather beautiful about that, a determination to be present, to be heard, to put forward a piece of yourself even when the stage is vast and the audience is everywhere else. Whether Dulcinea becomes the one who carries that voice forward, we will learn in time. For now, in the Republic on the Hill, a song called My Love is waiting to be sung, and the choosing has begun. A small country leaning toward the music, as it does each year with steady hope. Madagascar has long been famous for its baobabs, those enormous bottle-shaped trees that look as though they were planted upside down, roots reaching toward the sky. There are only a handful of baobab species in the world, and most of them live right here on this island, nowhere else. So when scientists say they have found a new one, it is not a small thing. Genetic analysis has confirmed what careful observation suggested, that among the baobabs of Madagascar, there is a species that had not been recognized before, distinct in its own right, with its own lineage written into its DNA. The discovery carries a quiet weight, because this newly named tree is already considered endangered. It has not had the luxury of being unknown for long before being counted among the vulnerable. That is often the way of it on this island. Madagascar separated from other land masses long ago, and life here evolved in isolation, producing forms found nowhere else on Earth. Baobabs are part of that story, ancient, patient, deeply rooted. To learn there is one more kind is to be reminded that the inventory of the living world is still incomplete, even among the most unmistakable of trees. And to learn it is already at risk is to understand something about how fragile that richness can be. If you're still with me, hold that thought, a tree standing somewhere on this island, now known, now named, and now in its quiet way, asking to be kept. Turkmenistan sits on some of the largest natural gas reserves in the world. And for years now, there has been a plan to send that gas southward, through Afghanistan, through Pakistan, and on to India. They call it the Tapi pipeline, taking a letter from each country it would cross. This week, officials from Turkmenistan met with representatives of the Taliban to talk about speeding the project along. The details of what was said haven't been made public, but the meeting itself tells you something about patience. This pipeline has been talked about for well over a decade. Routes have been surveyed, agreements have been signed, ground has been broken, and still the gas has not flowed. The stretch that worries everyone most is the one through Afghanistan, where security has never been simple. And so the conversations keep happening quietly, between the people who hold territory and the people who hold the gas. There is something steady about that, if you think about it. A pipeline is a long piece of engineering, but it is also a kind of bet, that the countries along the way will find reasons to cooperate rather than to pull apart. Turkmenistan has always kept its diplomacy unhurried and its doors open to whoever is governing next door. Whether this round of talks will move things any closer to completion, no one can say yet, but the line on the map is still there, waiting to be filled, and if you're still with me, we'll let that thought rest where it is. Panama sits between two oceans, and these days it's receiving visitors it didn't expect. South American seabirds, displaced by the warming waters of El Niño, have been turning up along Panama's coastlines in unusual numbers. The birds belong to waters farther south, places where cold currents normally run rich with fish. But El Niño shifts the temperature of the sea, and when the sea changes, the food moves and the birds follow. They've come looking for what their old feeding grounds can no longer promise them. It's the kind of story that doesn't make much noise. A bird doesn't arrive the way a ship does, with a horn and a wake. But for the people who watch these coastlines, fishermen, researchers, anyone who's learned to read the surface of the water, the arrival tells you something. It tells you the ocean is rearranging itself. Panama has seen El Niño before. The country knows what warm water does to fisheries, to rainfall, to the rhythm of a coast that depends on what the Pacific brings in. What's striking here isn't catastrophe, it's adaptation. Birds that belong somewhere else found their way to a shore that could still feed them. If you're still with me, you might picture that, a coastline quietly filling with strangers from the south, resting where they can, waiting for the water to cool and the old currents to return. It's a small thing in the scale of the world's news, but it carries something worth holding on to tonight. Oman sits at the eastern edge of the Arabian Peninsula, where the Gulf narrows toward the Strait of Hormuz, one of the busiest stretches of water anywhere on Earth. These days, that water is carrying something no one wants to see. An abandoned tanker, flagged to Russia, has been leaking oil off the Omani coast. 2 slicks have spread across the Gulf, and together they now cover hundreds of square miles. It is the kind of spill that quietly shifts from an incident into something larger. The kind that people who live along these shores watch with real worry. A British firm has begun containment and salvage work on the stricken vessel. That means people are out there now working at the edge of something difficult, trying to keep what has already escaped from spreading further. The timing is uneasy. The Strait of Hormuz carries nearly 9 million barrels of crude each day, and there have been quiet diplomatic conversations between Iran and Oman about navigation through those waters, talks that we're told may reach a conclusion soon. But beneath the geopolitics, there is a coastline, and there is the sea itself, and there are communities for whom it is not a shipping lane but a home. Containment is not the same as cleanup. That longer work, the slow reckoning with what the water holds, will go on long after the tankers quiet again. For now, the effort has begun, and that is where we leave it, out on the water, still unfolding. Luxembourg is a small country, and it knows it. Fewer than 700,000 people live there, tucked between Belgium, France, and Germany. But these days, size isn't the only measure of what a place can give. The government has announced an additional 8 million euros to help Ukraine prepare for winter, a season that in that part of the world is never just weather. It's infrastructure under strain, power grids targeted, families figuring out how to stay warm when the heat depends on systems that have been damaged. Luxembourg's contribution sits alongside other European efforts, part of a wider push to make sure communities across Ukraine head into the cold months with something more than resilience alone. 8 million euros won't rebuild a country. Nobody in Luxembourg's government would suggest it could. But it's a meaningful gesture from a place that doesn't have deep pockets the way some larger economies do. It pays for practical things, the kind of preparedness that doesn't make headlines but keeps lights on and water flowing when the temperature drops. And there's something quietly steady about it. Not a grand announcement, not a spectacle. Just a country looking at what it can do and doing it. If you're still with me, you might notice how often the stories worth carrying into the night are like that. Small acts, sent outward, landing somewhere they're needed. Luxembourg will carry on through its own autumn now, and somewhere far to the east, its help will arrive without fanfare. Austria has chosen a film called Rose as its submission for the Best International Feature category at the Oscars, a drama led by Sandra Hüller, the German actress whose presence on screen has a way of holding a room quiet. The selection was made public this week, and it puts Austria forward for the 2027 Academy Awards with a story built around a performer whose work has traveled far beyond her home borders. Hüller has become one of those actors whose name alone carries a certain weight, not through spectacle, but through the kind of performances that settle into you and stay. That Austria has built its Oscar campaign around her feels like a deliberate, steady choice. The film itself, Rose, is a drama, though the details of its story remain close to the chest in these early announcements. What we know is that a country with a deep filmmaking tradition looked at the work available and decided this was the one to carry its voice to the world. There is something gentle about that process, a nation sitting with its own cinema, choosing what it wants to say to an audience elsewhere. If you are still with me, you might picture a small screening room in Vienna, a committee watching quietly, and then a decision made. No fanfare, just a name written down. Rose will now enter a long road of consideration alongside submissions from dozens of countries, each one carrying its own small flag into a very large room. And for tonight, that is Austria's story. A film chosen, an actress trusted, and a quiet hope sent outward into the dark. Lebanon these days is a country holding its breath, caught between a fragile ceasefire and the long work of rebuilding what war has broken. And in the middle of that uncertain moment, something quieter is happening on the diplomatic front. Lebanon and Turkey are drawing closer together, faster than many expected. The details of what's driving this warming relationship aren't fully clear yet, but the direction is. Two nations with a complicated shared history are finding reasons to talk again, to trade again, to look each other in the eye. For Lebanon, that matters. This is a country whose prime minister has been pushing for a clear timetable for Israeli withdrawal from the south, while Hezbollah's leadership rejects the US-led deal as a humiliation. Homes have been demolished, and Lebanon's government has condemned those demolitions as a serious violation of international law. The environmental toll in the south is heavy, groves and farmlands scarred by months of fighting, so when a new door opens, even cautiously, it carries real weight. Turkey offers Lebanon something it needs right now, a partner that isn't asking it to choose sides so much as to keep standing. And Lebanon, for all it has been through, still knows how to reach out. If you're still with me, just hold that image for a moment. A small country, bruised but not broken, turning toward an old neighbor and saying, "Let's begin again." Nepal has always carried its history not just in stones and temples, but in the hands and voices of its people, in the songs taught at kitchen fires, in the dances that mark a harvest, in the crafts passed quietly from one generation to the next. These are the things UNESCO calls intangible cultural heritage, and they are fragile in a way that ancient walls are not. They survive only so long as someone keeps doing them. This week, the government of Nepal, with support from UNESCO, launched a community-based workshop aimed at exactly that, keeping those living traditions alive, not by locking them away, but by bringing the people who hold them into the conversation. The idea is simple and rather old. If you want to protect a practice, you ask the community that still lives inside it. You don't write a report about a fading ritual. You sit with the people who still perform it, and you listen to what they need. Nepal is a country where dozens of languages are spoken, where festivals shift meaning from one valley to the next, where a craft in one village may be unknown in the next. That richness doesn't fit neatly into a single national story. It lives in the details, in the local. And so a workshop like this is less about preservation in the museum sense and more about attention, making room for communities to name what matters to them and to say how they want it carried forward. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. Not a grand hall, but a room somewhere in Nepal, people gathered, speaking about the things their grandparents taught them, and deciding together that those things should not quietly disappear. Portugal, these past days, has been holding one of its great summer traditions, the Volta a Portugal, a bicycle race that winds through the country's towns and hills and draws riders from across Europe. But this year's edition has been stopped in its tracks by grief. A 19-year-old British cyclist named Finlay Tarling was killed during the 8th stage, struck in what race organizers described as a serious accident involving a vehicle. He was riding for a British team, far from home, doing the thing he loved. The news traveled quickly through the peloton and beyond it. Race officials made the decision to neutralize the stage, which means the riders continued to the finish, but not racing. They rode together slowly as a mark of respect. No attacks, no sprint, no contest, just a quiet procession to the line. It's the gesture cycling has when words fall short. The sport has its dangers, and everyone who rides knows that, but it doesn't make a moment like this any less heavy. Finlay was 19. That's the detail that sits with you. A life just beginning, cut short on a road in a country that was hosting him. If you're still with me tonight, maybe hold a thought for his family and for the riders who finished that stage with heavy hearts. The race will go on. It usually does. But this pause, this quiet ride to the finish, is what people will remember. Samoa has been thinking lately about how an ocean full of islands can look after each other when the weather turns. The country's adaptation plan calls for something called a regional catastrophe bond, and for broader parametric insurance coverage across the Pacific. Now, if you're not familiar with those terms, don't worry. The idea is simpler than it sounds. A catastrophe bond is essentially a promise that money will be there quickly after a disaster, without the long waiting that often follows a storm or a quake. Parametric insurance works similarly. Instead of assessing damage piece by piece, it pays out automatically when winds reach a certain speed or rainfall crosses a known threshold. For small island nations, where a single cyclone can undo years of progress, that speed matters enormously. Samoa's proposal is to build this not just for itself, but as a shared regional tool so that neighbors across the Pacific could draw on the same safety net. It's a quiet kind of ambition, really. Not a wall against the sea, but an agreement among friends that when one falls, the others are already reaching out. And in a part of the world where the distances are vast and the storms are growing less predictable, that kind of shared readiness feels less like policy and more like good sense. If you're still with me, it's worth sitting with that image for a moment, islands looking out for islands before we drift on. Switzerland has long been a country that does quiet things very well. Watches, chocolate, banking, those are the things people name first. But the engine underneath, the thing that keeps the whole machine turning, has increasingly been pharmaceuticals. This week there's word that Switzerland's economy has found something of a shortcut through its pharmaceutical sector. The details are still coming into focus, but the broad shape is familiar to anyone who's watched this small alpine country punch well above its weight. The pharma industry has been a cornerstone here for decades, anchored in cities like Basel, where research labs and global headquarters sit comfortably along the Rhine. What seems to be happening is that this sector is doing more than its usual heavy lifting, giving the Swiss economy a path forward at a moment when other European economies are searching for one. It's worth remembering that Switzerland isn't in the European Union, and it has always had to find its own arrangements, its own leverage. A strong pharmaceutical sector gives the country something to offer the world that the world genuinely needs: medicines, research, innovation, and that demand doesn't swing the way demand for luxury goods sometimes does. People fall ill in good economies and in bad ones. So if you're still with me, picture those quiet research corridors in Basel, the river moving slowly outside, and somewhere inside, the work that keeps a whole country steady. It's not the loudest story you'll hear tonight, but it might be one of the more important ones. Grenada is a small island nation, but it has never been short on memory. This week, in the calm formality of a legislative session, the President of the Senate rose to pay tribute to Fidel Castro. The words were spoken in the chamber where Grenada's laws are debated and passed, a room that carries its own weight of history, given everything this island has lived through. The tribute was recorded and shared by Cuba's foreign ministry, which noted it as a gesture of respect from one Caribbean nation to another. And there's a long backstory there, whether it was spoken aloud or simply understood in the room. Grenada and Cuba share a chapter of history that is still felt, still debated, still carried by people who lived through it. The ties between the two islands go back decades, to a period when Grenada's leadership looked toward Havana as an ally and a model, and when that alignment brought both hope and eventual tragedy. What a Senate tribute does, though, is something quieter than politics. It acknowledges that a figure from another country mattered here, that his presence in the region's story was real enough to be named in a formal session, years after his death. For the senators listening, and for anyone reading the record afterward, it was a moment of recognition. Not celebration, not condemnation, just the simple act of saying this person was part of our world and we remember. And in Grenada, where the sea is never far from the chamber walls, memory has always been something people hold carefully, like a lantern in the dark. Timor-Leste is one of the youngest countries in Asia, and its young people are doing something that might surprise you. They are fluent in artificial intelligence. They know the tools, they use them, they talk about them with ease. But at the same time, they are not ready, not because they lack curiosity or intelligence, but because the infrastructure around them has not caught up. Reliable electricity, steady internet, formal training, the institutional scaffolding that turns familiarity into opportunity, much of that is still being built. So you have a generation that can speak the language of a global technological shift, but cannot fully participate in it yet. It is a strange kind of gap, not a gap of awareness, but a gap of readiness, and it tells you something about how technology moves through the world now. It reaches places faster than development does. A teenager in Dili can ask the same questions of an AI model that a teenager in Seoul or Lisbon can, but the conditions around that teenager, the classroom, the connection, the next step, may be entirely different. There are efforts underway to address this. A national digital financial literacy campaign has been calling for proposals, which suggests the government recognizes that digital readiness is not just about gadgets, but about understanding. And in Dili this week, the Pacific Partnership Mission has made a stop, bringing medical, engineering, and civic engagement teams, a reminder that capacity building in Timor-Leste takes many forms. If you're still with me, hold this thought: fluency without infrastructure is not failure. It is a kind of promise. The knowledge is already there. The scaffolding just has to arrive. Malawi is not a country the football world has historically looked to first, but these days that's changing, and the reason has a family name. Tabitha and Temwa Chowinga are sisters, both footballers, and together they've done something no one from their country had done before. They've taken Malawi's women's team to the final of the Women's Africa Cup of Nations. The tournament is the continent's biggest stage for women's football, and Malawi arrived as underdogs. In their semifinal against Algeria, Both sisters scored in a 3-1 win that surprised nearly everyone watching. It wasn't a fluke of fortune. It was the work of two players who've spent years building careers far from home. Tabitha has made history with her club in the United States, and then bringing all of that back to wear the national colors. Their opponent in the final is Cameroon, another nation chasing its own piece of history. But for Malawi, simply standing on that pitch in a final is already something new. A country that has been wrestling with deep economic strain, that has been quietly working through the last difficult stretch of a long public health campaign against HIV, a country with plenty of weight on its shoulders, now has two sisters running across a football field, carrying its name into a match that matters. Whether they win or lose the final, the legacy is already taking root. And if you're still with me, that's worth holding on to as the night settles. Tajikistan doesn't often make the news for things found in the ground, but this week, archaeologists there have uncovered something quietly remarkable: a royal seal from the Kushan Empire, roughly 2,000 years old. The Kushans ruled a vast stretch of Central Asia and South Asia at a time when the Silk Road was still young, and their kings left behind coins, inscriptions, and seals like this one as marks of authority. Finding a royal seal at all is rare. Finding one this far north, in the mountains and valleys of what is now Tajikistan, is rarer still. It tells you something about how far the Kushan world reached, not just into the lowlands of Afghanistan and northern India, but up into the high country where Tajik communities have lived for centuries. Details about where exactly the seal was found, or who unearthed it, are still thin. But the object itself carries its own quiet weight. A seal like this was pressed into wax or clay to authenticate a decree, a letter, a transaction. Someone powerful held it. Someone else trusted the market left. And then it disappeared into the earth, and the empires above it rose and fell, and the languages changed, and the borders moved, and now it has surfaced again in a country that is itself still young. If you're still with me, hold that image for a moment. A small carved object pressed once into soft clay, waiting 2 millennia to be seen again. There's something restful about that kind of patience. Morocco sits at one of the world's most watched crossings, the narrow fence that separates it from Ceuta, a Spanish enclave on the North African coast. These days, that fence has become the center of something difficult and tangled. Not long ago, a surge of people rushed the border into Ceuta, driven in part by false rumors that spread online, promising open doors that did not exist. Both Morocco and Spain have since reinforced their forces along the perimeter, and there are fresh calls circulating again. More whispers online, more anxiety about another mass crossing. Behind the geopolitics, there is grief. In northern Morocco, families have been mourning young people who drowned in the waters off Ceuta, trying to make that short, dangerous passage. Le Monde reported their words plainly: "We are losing our youth." It is a story where several things are true at once. Morocco has grown more assertive on the world stage, strengthened by deepening ties with the United States, and migration has become part of a larger diplomatic leverage between nations. But the people in the water and the families waiting at home are not leverage. They are someone's children, chasing a rumor or a hope and finding the sea instead. If you're still with me, hold that for a moment. The distance between a rumor and a shoreline is sometimes very small, and sometimes it is final. Morocco knows this, the way a country knows its own coast. Kuwait sits at the edge of a stretch of water that the whole world passes through, but which matters to Kuwait more than to almost anyone else. The Strait of Hormuz is the channel between the Gulf and the open ocean, and nearly all of Kuwait's oil reaches the world by passing through it. There is, as one observer put it plainly, no substitute. These days, that narrow passage has become uncertain. Tensions involving Iran have raised the possibility of disruption, and Kuwait has responded with the kind of caution that comes from knowing how much is at stake. The state oil company has cut production as a precaution. Shipments have been affected seriously enough that Kuwait has declared force majeure on some oil deliveries, a legal step that essentially tells buyers circumstances beyond our control have intervened. It is not a step anyone takes lightly, and the risk is not only to oil. Analysts have begun speaking about a new era of vulnerability for water infrastructure across the region, where even the systems that keep communities supplied with drinking water can become targets. And yet, within Kuwait's energy sector, there is also a note of quiet confidence. Industry voices have pointed out that national oil companies have shown real capability in navigating regional challenges, and Kuwait's longer-term ambitions, including production growth targets set for 2035, remain on the table. The country is not standing still. It is watching the strait, adjusting where it must, and holding to plans that look well beyond the current strain. If you are still with me, that is Kuwait tonight, holding steady at the water's edge. Iraq has been watching its oil flow pick up again, and these days that matters more than you might think. Daily exports have climbed past 1.5 million barrels a day, the highest level officials say since the war began. For a country where oil is the backbone of nearly everything the government funds, that recovery is not just a number on a ledger. It is salaries paid, clinics kept open, a little breathing room in a budget that has been stretched thin, but the breathing room is still narrow. A fiscal crisis persists beneath the rebound, and the gap between what Iraq earns and what it needs has not closed. The country has also been looking for new ways to move its oil to market, searching for export routes that can hold steady when old ones falter. There are signs that the UAE might be able to help with that, though nothing is settled yet. What strikes you if you step back is the rhythm of it, a nation rebuilding its livelihood one barrel at a time, while the weight of old debts and new pressures still presses down. The exports are up. The crisis hasn't lifted. Both things are true at once, and Iraq is holding them together as it moves forward into another night. And that's the world for tonight. Wherever you are, whatever tomorrow holds, rest easy. The world will keep turning slowly while you sleep, and we'll take another quiet trip around it tomorrow night. Good night.